Hey everyone, and welcome to the first installment of the 150 gallon aquarium redo. For those of you who've been with the channel for a little while, you know that my tropical fish used to be in this 90 gallon right here. Now just recently they got moved into my 150 gallon, which I've been really trying to give it a facelift for the past few months, just trying to make something really cool and unique. And for those of you who follow me on Instagram, you've seen little progress shots of it here and there. But in today's installment, what I'm going to do is show you how I prepped the aquarium and got it ready for use, as well as how I made a freshwater aquarium sump. Now, this isn't an all-inclusive guide on how to make a sump, but I tried to make it as informative as I possibly could, as well as easy to follow as I possibly could. So it's a little bit longer, but there's a ton of information in here, so I hope you guys enjoy this, and let's get into it. We'll start out with the aquarium itself. For those of you who don't know, I bought this tank on Craigslist about 4 years ago. It was originally used as a saltwater tank before I had it. Then it housed my snapping turtle for about a year, and for the remainder of that time my king snake lived in it. Needless to say, after all of that, it's in much need of a reseal. Before I could start resealing the aquarium though, I had to remove these bulkheads on the bottom of the tank. Whoever had this tank before me didn't set up the hardware very well. However, I'm just as much to blame, as I could have easily updated this whenever I originally got the aquarium. Anyways, with the bulkheads gone, I could then remove the existing silicone. This aquarium likely could have held water, but as you can see, the silicone is in rough shape. I would rather address it now while the tank's empty before it could become a problem down the road. Plus, it's a tradition of mine to reseal all of my larger aquariums before a new project if they've been in use for a few years. In order to reseal an aquarium properly, it's important to remove all of the old silicone. I prefer to use a razor scraper to do the job. I should mention that it's really tough to remove the old silicone if you don't have a sharp blade, so it's pretty important to change your blade as frequently as possible. I probably went through at least 15 blades just to remove this portion of the silicone. After removing all of the silicone, it's imperative to clean the glass thoroughly. Any sort of isopropyl rubbing alcohol will work just fine. After wiping the glass, let the alcohol air off. This usually doesn't take more than a few minutes. Next, I recommend putting down some masking tape so that you can get a clean bead of silicone. With the tape in place, you can caulk a bead of silicone all around the tank. Using your finger or a tool, you can then smooth out the silicone and remove the tape. After letting the silicone cure for a good 24 to 48 hours, and assuming that you did it properly, the tank should hold water just fine. Resealing an aquarium is a very useful skill and pretty easy to do. Most people will simply sell or throw away their aquariums once they stop holding water. Jumping on these opportunities and putting in a little work will save you some serious cash down the road. If you want to see an extensive demonstration on how to reseal an aquarium, follow the link. Next, I proceeded to remove the existing bulkheads from the back of the tank. During this process, I had to scrape off some of the paint from the back of the aquarium. Therefore, I had to touch it up once more. I like to use black enamel paint for this purpose. With 2 coats, you can get a really smooth look, even if your brush strokes aren't consistent. Plus, it's pretty cheap and won't get messed up from any water that will splash on it. From here, we'll move on to creating the sump. In order for this portion of the video to flow smoothly, I think it will help to look at the final product. Here's a 40 gallon breeder aquarium that was converted into a freshwater sump. Much like any other type of filter, water comes into the sump, passes through various types of media, and then is returned back to the aquarium. What makes the sump unique is that there are dividers, known as baffles, which physically separate the media into individual compartments. Depending on what you want to achieve with your sump, you will generally need 3 or more baffles. I'm using 4 baffles for this sump, and here's why. In the first compartment where the water enters into the sump will be mechanical filtration. Then in the next compartment over will be more mechanical filtration, followed by a little bit of biological filtration. Then in the largest compartment will be more biological filtration. This area won't always be at max capacity, but it will allow me to store additional media for when it's needed, along with other things. Next is a compartment for my heaters, and finally is the compartment for the return pump and chemical filtration when needed. And that's the basic overview of this sump. We'll take a more extensive look at how it works later on in the video, but before then, I'll show you how it's made. Let's start out by getting some glass for the baffles. In this demonstration, I'm using some standard 1/4 inch thick plate glass. However, as you can see, I have two different thicknesses of glass here. The one on top is a 3/32 inch piece of glass from Lowe's. This is generally the type of glass that people initially think they can use for a sump, but in most applications it's just too thin. A good rule of thumb when choosing the thickness of the glass for your baffles is to match the thickness of the glass that your aquarium is made of. So in my case, the 40-gallon aquarium is made of 1/4 inch thick glass, so I got 4 pieces of 1/4 inch thick plate glass to match it. Once you've chosen the proper thickness of glass, you need to determine the dimensions of the glass itself. Well, this will largely be dependent on how much water you want your sump to hold. I recommend leaving a decent amount of empty space in your sump to prepare for a power outage or equipment failure. Inevitably, when one of these occur, and they will, some amount of water will drain down into your sump. With that in mind, the volume of water that your sump will hold is dictated by the height of the baffles. How about determining the width of the baffles? Well, that's actually quite simple. Measure the width of the side panel of your aquarium. By this I mean only the panel of glass, not the entire aquarium. Then subtract 1/8 inch from that measurement. This will create a 1/16 inch gap in between the pieces of glass that will later be filled with silicone. You don't want glass on glass, and to prove my point, look at the aquarium itself. The panels of glass don't actually touch, there is silicone in between them. Now that we have the baffles selected, we'll prep the aquarium for their installation. I like to use a China marker to mark where all of my pieces will go. It can easily be wiped off the glass down the road. I recommend making the measurements for the return compartment or any other compartments that need to be sized based on equipment first. It's not going to matter if you make your biological compartment an inch too small or an inch too large, but if you mess up with the return compartment, you will have to redo it, so make sure to leave a little bit of extra space. This will also come in handy down the road if you ever need to replace the pump for whatever reason. After this, go around and measure for all of the other compartments. Doing this on both sides of the glass is a good idea, so that you can put the baffles into the aquarium as square as possible. It may also be beneficial to mark on the bottom of the aquarium. Once again, sizing the compartments will be totally dependent on what you want to achieve with your sump, so there's not really an exact science. With the aquarium all marked up, I recommend cleaning the inside of the aquarium with rubbing alcohol, or at least the areas where you need to apply silicone. Although this is a brand new aquarium, there is dust and debris that could compromise the seal if left unchecked. With that said, anytime that you're going to use silicone for a project, just ensure that you're applying it to a nice clean surface. After cleaning the aquarium, do the same thing to the edges of the baffles. If you want, you can tape off the sump so that you have a clean look. Originally I went around and did this, but it later proved to be more trouble than it's worth. However, if you intend to do this, make sure to leave enough room for the thickness of the pane of glass and a bead of silicone. A little tip that I can give you is to pull the excess tape out of the aquarium and fold it over to make a little tab. This will make it so that you can easily remove the tape later on. The same technique can also be used when resealing an aquarium. Now we need to select the silicone. On the right is some black aquarium grade silicone that I used to reseal the aquarium earlier in the video. However, I recommend using GE Silicone 1 for this part of the build. It's about half the price and is regularly used by hobbyists to build aquariums. You can use whatever silicone you want though, that's just my recommendation. However, just ensure that whatever you're using is aquarium safe. If you didn't tape off the aquarium, then you can simply apply the silicone and be done. Regardless, just run a continuous bead of silicone along the guides that you marked earlier. Don't worry if you apply too much, we can clean up the excess later on. You will be better off to apply too much silicone than not enough, so be generous with it. After you get the bead down, you can press the glass right into the silicone. The tack of the silicone should be enough to hold the glass in place. From here, run another bead of silicone on the outside edges of the baffle like so. Finally, smooth out the silicone with your finger and remove the tape if you used it. Repeat the same process on any other baffles that touch the bottom of the aquarium. I recommend letting the silicone cure for a little bit so that you can attach the other baffles without ruining these ones. After waiting for a few hours, we'll move on to the floating panels, or the ones that don't touch the bottom of the aquarium. For this part, you'll need something underneath of the panels to keep them in place. I'm simply using some scrap pieces of wood. I also recommend anchoring the glass in place with something like this Gorilla Tape. You have two options when applying the silicone for the floating baffles. You can put the glass in place, anchor it with tape, run and smooth the silicone beads, and remove the masking tape. In doing so, the silicone will actually seep in between the panes of glass. Or you can put the silicone into the aquarium, place the glass, anchor the glass with tape, smooth out the silicone, and remove the masking tape if you used it. Either method will work fine, and it's totally up to you. Once all of the baffles are in place, allow the silicone to cure for at least 24 hours. Once you've waited for that amount of time, the baffles will officially be in place. Then you can remove the tape anchors and whatever you use to elevate the floating baffles. Now we'll go back with our razor scraper and clean up any excess silicone. You don't have to do this, but it's never a bad idea to go for a better aesthetic. At this point, we no longer need the guides on the outside of the glass, so we can take a little rubbing alcohol and remove the marks with a paper towel. And voila, the main structure of the sump is complete. From here on out, everything else is very custom to what I'm trying to achieve with my system. However, this could give you some ideas on what's capable with your sump. I will also show you briefly how I cycled this aquarium. Now let's return to the aquarium. To start, we'll attach three 3-inch bulkheads to the back of the aquarium. To install a bulkhead is quite simple. Make sure that the rubber gasket is on the inside of the tank where it holds water. This is what actually creates the seal. Then slip the main assembly through the hole and over top of the gasket. Then the plastic washer and lock nut can be attached to the other side of the main assembly. It's worth mentioning that unlike most things, with bulkheads you actually need to turn the lock nut counterclockwise to make it tighter. Next, I got 5 ABS adapters that have a hub on one end and are threaded on the other. These will all get screwed into the bulkheads, 3 on the outside and 2 on the inside. I wrapped some thread seal tape on the ones that will go on the outside, which will prevent any leaks from occurring. After getting the adapters all taped up, I screwed them into the bulkheads most of the way, and to finish up the job I put on some grip gloves. These gloves allowed me to screw them in even tighter. Then I screwed the other adapters into the top bulkheads from the inside. These will be a part of the overflow later on. Now I grabbed two 90-degree ABS street elbows and put them into the adapters. The reason that I put the adapters into the bulkheads first was so that I could easily adjust these elbows later on. Since they're not screwed in place, they can be rotated, replaced, or removed for maintenance quite easily. They too are a main component of the overflow. Finally, I got a low profile strainer and screwed it into the bottom bulkhead, which will be used for water changes. From here we'll move on to the back assembly of the overflow system. From left to right we have a hose adapter, a female adapter, a reducer bushing, a PVC pipe, a ball valve, another PVC pipe, another reducer bushing, a coupling, a PVC pipe, a reducer bushing, and finally a street elbow. I know this is a ridiculous amount of pieces, but I was tinkering in the hardware store forever trying to make this work. No doubt it's not the most effective use of all these pieces, but it works great. The main thing that I wanted to do was have a ball valve and a hose adapter. This will all make more sense later on. Anyways, using some PVC primer and cement, I put all of these pieces together in the order shown previously. Of course, I had to do this 3 times so that I could make all 3 of these. Before finalizing these pieces, I wanted to test them on the aquarium to see how they fit. They fit just as planned, so I went back and wrapped some thread seal tape on the hose adapters, which were then screwed back into place. Then I cemented these pieces into the ABS adapters from earlier. You're supposed to use a special type of cement when welding PVC to ABS, but I used the same cement as before. I personally haven't had any issues doing this, but if you do the same, do so at your own discretion. After allowing all of these pieces to cure, I got a length of flex tube, put it onto the hose adapters, and ran it down into the sump. Once I liked the length, I cut off the excess. Then I got 2 bulkheads with a threaded hose attachment built in. These were installed into the bottom holes of the aquarium just like the other bulkheads, only this time I used a wrench to tighten them in place. One of these bulkheads will be used for the return pump and the other will be for a backup. And here are all of the pieces laid out. These components are a little bit more self-explanatory than last time, but I got a few PVC elbows, some lengths of PVC pipe, a threaded adapter, and an adjustable return nozzle. All of these pieces were then put together as seen here. After dry fitting all of these pieces together, I put them into the aquarium to ensure they fit properly. Once I determined that they were good to go, I spray painted them black with some Krylon fusion paint. Unlike normal spray paint, this paint actually bonds to plastics, so once cured it's completely safe to use in aquariums. After letting the spray paint cure for 24 hours, I cemented these pieces together and then they were cemented into the bulkheads. With the bulkheads addressed, the aquarium is pretty much ready to go. We just have to add the final components to the sump. To start, we'll attach some vinyl hoses to the threaded end of the bulkhead. You'll notice that this first piece has a ball valve on it. I have this in place in case I ever want to use the bulkhead for a different purpose. Then I attached another vinyl tube to the other bulkhead. This one will be attached to the return pump in just a moment. I got another length of vinyl tube and attached it to a ball valve and a threaded hose connector that's also attached to a threaded reducer bushing. All of this of course was connected to the return pump and vinyl tube from earlier. The reason why I set it up this way will make complete sense once you see the sump up and running. Now let's finalize the sump. I started this part by placing 2 egg crate trays into the sump. These will allow the water to effectively flow through the media. Then I put the sump back under the aquarium and added another egg crate tray to the first compartment. You'll notice that this one has a slot cut out into the right side. This slot will keep the flex tubes in place. After inserting the tubes into this slot, I added a layer of coarse filter foam. Next I put a layer of pinky filter floss and then a layer of polyfill. Normally I put the polyfill in first and then the pinky filter floss, but I started out this way to catch more organics when cycling the aquarium. You didn't see it, but at this point the aquarium is actually full of water. I just have to open the ball valves for the overflow and let it rip. As I mentioned earlier, the purpose of these ball valves is to control the amount of water coming through the overflow or shut it off completely. So with the ball valves open, the sump can begin to fill with water thanks to the overflow. As the sump fills up, the water will work its way into the various compartments. You probably noticed that I already have some of the biological media in the sump. That said, from right to left I have some DIY bio balls, a bag of lava rock, and a bag of ceramic rings. Now all of this is brand new media, so to get my aquarium cycled faster, I added a bag of pre-cycled media from an established tank, followed by a bag of old filter floss from the same aquarium, and a bucket of water full of malm. Some of the sand that I used in this aquarium was also pre-cycled, however I'll talk about that in a later video. I should mention though that I let this aquarium run for about a month or so before adding the fish. With the sump up and running, I could then create a lid. Water will readily evaporate from the sump, so I highly recommend including a lid. With that in mind, I got some corrugated plastic and cut 2 pieces of it to size. These 2 pieces were then set directly on top of the sump. It should be noted that there are some open spots where the hardware goes into the sump, but even still these lids greatly reduce the amount of evaporation. Before we take a final look at this, there's one more, very important component that we need to make. If you remember, I never made a strainer for the overflow. This is a problem because fish could readily get into the sump and it sounds like this. That's pretty loud, right? Well, we'll create a variation of a Stockman's standpipe in order to muffle the overflow and keep fish out. What you need first is a length of PVC that fits into the elbow. From there, you'll cut off a small piece and insert it into the elbow. Then you'll need to mark this piece where the elbow covers the pipe. Using this guide, drill some holes all around the pipe. You want them to be as large as possible so you don't hinder the overflow. After doing so, you want to end up with something that looks a little like this. Now when you put this pipe into the elbow, the water still overflows freely. From here we'll need another PVC pipe, but this one needs to be slightly larger than the diameter of the elbow's opening. Then simply cut a piece of this pipe to the same height as the previous pipe. And after doing so, it should look a little something like this. Now get some vinyl tubing and cut off a small section. You have to play around with this a little bit to get it right, but essentially we need to use this tubing to make a seal. To make this seal, you'll simply make a loop with the tube and stuff it down into the PVC pipe. With the vinyl tube in place, you can then put the smaller PVC down into the opening. It should fit pretty snugly, just ensure that the tube doesn't cover any of the holes. Finally, get a cap and drill a little hole in the top. This hole will allow the overflow to continue to work effectively by pulling air in. And that's it. This whole piece will simply be placed right on top of the elbow like so. As you can see, even with this piece placed into the elbow, the overflow isn't affected at all. However, the aquarium just got a lot quieter, and fish won't get pulled into the sump. To finalize these pieces, I sanded off the sharp edges and spray painted the outside black with some Krylon fusion paint. And now we will take a final look at everything. The water overflows from the back of the tank through these adjustable tubes. The flex tubes then go down into the sump. They are covered by a filter bag and then go down into the egg crate. From there the water rises up through a layer of coarse filter foam, then some polyfill, and finally a layer of pinky filter floss. All of this media is held down by a piece of egg crate. The egg crate itself is held in place by some old suction cups which can be easily removed to service the media when necessary. After the water passes through the first chamber, it then passes through another layer of pinky filter floss and some DIY biological media. Then the water passes under the second baffle and up through the main biological compartment. In here I have 2 large bags of lava rock, a bag of ceramic rings, and a bag of miscellaneous items from a different aquarium. This compartment also houses the heaters. I put them in this compartment because they were too hard for me to service in the compartment that they were actually intended for. Next, the water overflows into the return compartment. In this compartment I have a bag of activated carbon and my return pump, which is a Fluval Sea SP4. If you want specifics on choosing the proper pump size, go check out the video description. Here's what the return compartment looks like on a normal day. If you remember, I said to leave a decent amount of empty space to prepare for a power outage or equipment failure. So here's what happens when I shut off the pump to simulate one of those events. It fills up with a decent amount of water, but it doesn't overflow. If you remember, I constructed the tube for the output with a ball valve and a reducer bushing. I made it like this so that the pump could be easily disconnected to service later on. I also have a filter bag attached to the intake of the pump so that nothing gets sucked up into the impeller. After turning the pump back on, I let the water return to its normal level and mark the side of this compartment for a safe fill line. This will make it so that I never fill up my aquarium too much. With that in mind, I also have to make sure that the water level doesn't get too low or I could burn out the pump. And that about sums it up for this video. If you've never used a sump before and are thinking of getting into one, I highly recommend giving it a try. It can seem somewhat daunting at first, but it's really quite simple and easy to use. If you go check out the video description, I have more details that elaborate on this project. If you're interested in seeing what else I do to update this aquarium, then stay tuned. And as always, I appreciate you guys and I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.